Welcome to the latest episode of the Podiatry Business Podcast with myself, Lorcan O'Donaile, podiatrist and podiatry business mentor. So today's podcast is called Are Associates Ruining Your Podiatry Business? So when I first started my clinic, I started from scratch and I built up the business on my own, treating patients. I was pretty good at it, got full pretty quickly and realized after a while that it was very much dependent on me and I couldn't really take a break. If I got sick, I had nowhere to put the patients, etc. So I realized I probably want to take on another staff member. And I assumed that if I took on a staff member that I would make more money, as in another podiatrist. So I did what everybody tends to do, and I took on an associate. Now an associate means essentially, what I mean by that is if I take on somebody, I give them a percentage of what they get paid. Now I made a complete mess of it because I didn't know what I was doing. But I took on a podiatrist and I took on a physiotherapist, and I paid out in one case over 55% and in another case over 66%. 66%. Now I have heard people pay more. So for every $100 or £100 they'd bring in, I'd give them 66 of it back. And what I was trying to do is I was trying to get the diary as full as I can and get us as busy as we can. Now, what ended up happening is it was a disaster for me, for my business. It caused me to become highly stressed. It caused me to nearly go broke, and it caused an awful lot of aggro within the clinic. For example, one very simple thing that would happen is the associate wouldn't make money unless their diary was full. So they wanted their diary full all of the time, and they might be concerned that I was trying to keep stuff that was more high ticket and give them the lower ticket stuff, because essentially it was like almost like a dog eat dog. Everybody wanted to have a full diary of the more profitable work, because that's how they were going to make money. So I'm not a huge fan of the idea of having an associate in your business. Now I do understand that in certain circumstances it is the right call, but in the vast majority of cases, if you're building a podiatry clinic that isn't going to be dependent on you and it gives you a better quality of life, associate is not the way to go. So why did I bring this up today? Well, I've had two clinic owners that I have started working with very recently. One a podiatrist and one a physiotherapist, and in both cases their staff are associates and their clinical staff, and they're on a very high margin. I mean a very high margin, up there where I was and maybe even further. In one case, one of the associates is earning 3 times more per hour than the actual owner of the clinic. And I don't think the associate understands that. And it's not the associate's fault, it's the owner's fault. But it's just simply not sustainable. Imagine you own a business. If you're an associate listening to this, imagine you own a business and your staff are earning 3 times more than you are. You're not going to put up with that for very long. You're going to go after a while, well, this isn't really worth it. I'm running this business just to pay them and I'm not getting anything out of it. And it's causing substantial strain, financial strain in the business. The business could be in trouble unless we fix this. It's causing substantial strain at home, because that financial pressure is causing strain within the marriage and causing strain at home because money's just simply not there. Now that is not the associate's fault. Of course it's not, because they were giving an offer, and of course they're going to take the offer because it's an offer that's almost too good to refuse. But whose fault is it? And for me, to a degree, it's almost the profession's fault, because we've kind of assumed that this is what we should be doing in podiatry, in physio too, without really thinking any deeper than that, because it's what everyone else is doing. So why do clinic owners even do this? Why do they take on someone as an associate and end up paying them more in many cases than they're getting paid themselves? Now I understand that this isn't always the case, but in the kind of people who come to me because they're trying to build their business and they're not able to get it where they want to, I see this is a really common trait. And the reason I think clinic owners do this is because they start a business, and like me, they don't really know what they're doing when it comes to starting a business. They think, I just need to be good clinically and I can do well. Or maybe they were working for someone else and they saw all this money coming in, and they naively assumed that because all this money coming in, that the owner's making loads of money, there's loads left over, which is not the case. So what they did is they just copy what everyone else is doing in the profession. And they don't see that actually, they don't perceive that it is going to be risky. In fact, what they think is that it's going to lower the risk, because their concept is that, well, if there's no work coming in, I don't have to pay them, and therefore I don't have to come up with a wage, and I'm not under stress to do so. Now, if you have a business that has a lack of patience, that can often, I can see the reason for that, but that's a different issue. What you need to do there is fix your marketing, fix your lead flow, your patient flow. But if you have a business that's very busy and you know you're going to fill their diary, well, then that is not a good reason to do it, because the risk isn't really there, and you're not actually reducing the risk, you're actually increasing the risk on your business, because it comes at a significant cost to you and your business. So if you're watching this, you're listening to this maybe on podcast, and you've got associates, how do you know if your associates that you have are a good idea? Now, I do understand that it might suit your needs. Maybe you're a 2-person clinic, or you're a 1.5-person clinic, and you just want someone ad hoc and you don't want the stress of running a big business. Cool. But in many cases, it isn't a good idea. So how do you know that if you have associates that it is a good idea or not? So other than if it fits your needs from a non-financial perspective, the main factor really comes down to costs, because business is a numbers game, and you're running a business at the end of the day. You're not running this business. You're not going in every day and treating patients and running this business and taking on all of this aggro, I suppose, to not make money at the end of it. Why not just go and get a job for someone else if that's the case? So it's down to costs. Now, business is numbers game, like I said. So it's revenue, how much you're bringing in every month, less the costs. And your costs are made up of wages, running costs, and they're the main things. Your rent, maybe, etc., things like that. Now, so what people do is they go, well, this is my revenue, I'll take away my costs, whatever's left over is what I'm making. And that's the typical way people run the business. Now, if we talk about, I don't think that's a good way to do it. I think what you should do instead is you should use the profit first concept. So the profit first concept is revenue less my profits is what's left over to run the business. So I need to run the business within whatever's left over. So if, for example, I want to earn 100,000 euros a year or pounds a year, and I bring in 500,000, well, then I have 400,000 to run it, and everything has to cost no more than 400,000. Rather than what people do is they bring in 500 and they hope something's left over at the end of it. So maybe I'll make 100,000. So profit first. But what happens in service industry, and you're in a service industry norms, and what you should be aiming for in your clinic is that you have a admin wage bill that is maxed out at 10% of your turnover. So if you bring in, for argument's sake, 10,000 a month, your admin wage shouldn't be no more than 1,000. Your clinical wage, excluding yourself as the owner, should be ideally no more than 30%, giving you a wage total of 40%. And then your running costs should be 30%, giving you a total figure of 70%. So that will leave you, the owner, with 30% as a profit for you, whether you take it all as wage, some as pension, etc., dividend. It really just depends on how you structure it, if you have a good accountant. But what you want to be doing is you want to make sure that your clinical wage is not going beyond, say, the 30% mark, because when you do so, it starts to squeeze what's left over at the end for you, and in a lot of cases you'll end up finding that you're working for less per hour than your staff are. And what is the point in having a business if you're making the least amount of money? I've even had clinic owners come to me and their admin team, their front desk, is making more money than they are. But they're not aware of this because they don't know their numbers. So what do? Well, first thing is you need to figure out actually what does a good outcome look like for me. So you need to start with, what do I want? How many hours do I want to work? What do I want my life to look like? How much money do I need to live that life? And that's your starting point. Then you work backwards and figure out, well, if I have for argument's sake, a 30% profit margin, I need to earn X amount or bring in X amount to have that profit left over. And then you need to make sure that your costs fit within that. So if your wage bill is at 66%, which it was in my case, so I was handing 66% over to my staff, to my clinical staff. I was handing another 10% over to my admin staff, bringing me up to 76%. And it was costing 22% of turnover to run the business, which meant at the end of the year, I personally had 3% of the entire turnover left off as a wage, whereas my clinical staff were having 22 times that. So that makes no sense. That's not the way it should be. So you work out what you want and you work backwards. If you then find that the way you have constructed your agreement with your team, with your associates, maybe you need to make a change. So making a change either is renegotiating that number down as a percentage or putting them into an employee basis. Now, there are lots of different things you can do to reduce that, which I'm not really going to get into here in detail, but this is one of the first things that we start to do in the business. We look at when we start coaching clients, clinic owners, we first start to see where is their, do they know their numbers? And in most cases, they don't. So if you're watching this and you don't know what your turnover was last month, you're in trouble. If you don't know what your break even is every week, you're in trouble. So you've got to know your numbers. We figure out what your numbers are. We figure out where we want them to be. And then we start to pull some levers in the business to make changes. But wages is going to be your single biggest cost in your business. Now, I'm not at any point suggesting that we don't pay people a fair wage, because if you don't pay people a fair wage, you will end up with a revolving door of staff. That and culture, obviously. But you at the same time have to give yourself a fair wage, a fair income from what you're doing. And if your associates can't see that, if they're not willing to do that, well then unfortunately you're going to have to replace them with someone else. Good quality recruitment will allow you to do so. So if you have associates in your business and you feel that they're earning more than you can afford, if it's not really working out for you as the owner of the business, start to revisit it, and don't let having associates ruin your business and ruin your ability to have financial freedom in your life. So until next time, this is Lorcan O'Donaile, Podiatry Business Mentor, signing out.